Hello, welcome back. This is video 2 where me, Jamit Fandino, I'm trying to share with you some tips, some suggestions you should consider, you should take into account when thinking about a research proposal, either because you're writing the research proposal and you're presenting it to your advisor or to a group of professors or people who want to have a look at it and want to give you feedback, or because you are socializing it, you are presenting it to an audience. Okay, and in the first part of the video, we were talking about the title, the research problem statement, and we were talking about at the end of that first video about research problem formulation. And I was showing you an example of research questions and research objectives that are not the best, that you need to reconsider. So the last part of the video, we just checked that the main question here is way too general, that is not specific, and that the secondary questions out of the blue start mentioning things that are not included in the original question, the first question. Then one doesn't really understand why you're talking about activities and materials. For example, why not invent strategies, or why not methods, approaches? If and that happens because the main question is way too general, and the secondary questions seem not to be connected. Also notice that in the secondary questions we have here a yes/no question, which is not okay, because what are you going to say at the end of your research project? Yes, because, no, because. Instead of yes/no questions, we normally use WH questions. How, to what extent, what kind of. So avoid yes/no questions. Then, in terms of the research objectives, a similar problem, we have critical thinking strategies. And then in the general objective, analyze critical thinking strategies in a literature class. And then the specific objectives are different. They start talking about materials. They also talk about a new syllabus. And then you can notice that they are not connected. They are not coherent. They are confusing. And also you have, as a general objective, analyze. And then you see that the actions, the verbs that are being used in the specific objectives don't really match that. They have identify, study, design. If you're going to analyze, what is it that you do? You compare and contrast. You need to do activities that are more related to analyzing. You might also try to come up in terms of analysis. You can go into comparing specific things, contrasting them. You can also think about establishing a certain set of criteria that you have pre-selected. So analyze, identify, study seem not to be well connected. On top of that, we have out of the blue another situation that is design a new syllabus. The design of materials, of a new program, of a new syllabus, is not a research objective per se. You don't create a research study to design something. It might come up as a product of it, as a result, because you collected some data, you analyze that data, and then you notice certain things, and to address those things, those issues, you propose something. But that is like the result of, it's not part of what you do. Particularly in this case, this is not, for example, a curricular kind of research. So the design of the new syllabus doesn't seem to be something that you should include here. And there's something else that we should consider, and it's whether or not the questions to the left are clearly related to the questions on the right. In terms of coherence, in terms of cohesiveness, in terms of helping the research proposal have a better sense of unity, we want to make sure that the questions and the objectives relate, are clearly connected. And here, they don't seem to be connected as well. For example, we have in the first secondary question, what activities do teachers use in a literature class? And then when you compare that to the specific objectives, you're going to notice that it says identify how teachers educate in critical thinking. So there's not a clear connection. So let's try to see examples of what might be better research questions. Okay, here we have research questions, again, and research objectives, following the example that I have been using in terms of higher thinking skills in a literature-based class. And notice the first question is very much connected to the title that we discussed in video 1. How do teachers use higher order thinking skills in a literature-based class with 7th semester students in the LaSalle MBA in Spanish and foreign languages? And then you have two secondary questions. What kind of higher order thinking skills do teachers work with 7th semester students in the LaSalle MBA program? In the LaSalle MBA program in Spanish and foreign languages. In what ways do teachers teach higher order thinking skills in a literature-based class with 7th semester students? And then you have general objectives. Describe the use of higher order thinking skills in a literature-based class with 7th semester students in the LaSalle MBA program in Spanish and foreign languages. And then you have identify the higher order thinking skills teachers work with 7th semester students in the LaSalle MBA program. Characterize the teaching activities teachers use to teach higher order thinking skills in a literature-based class with 7th semester students. Okay, here, if you read them, you might notice that they are a little bit more precise, more concrete, that they seem to be connected. They even seem repetitive. Some students believe or feel that that's not okay, that they should avoid that repetition instead of using the same words. Example, they are talking about strategies in the questions, but then they decide to use, instead of strategies in the objective, they use techniques. But strategies and techniques are not the same. Or for example, here they are talking about activities in the research questions, and then to avoid the repetition that they feel it's not okay, they say something else, tasks, exercises. So notice that one should avoid that. So let's analyze these questions and then let's see why they seem to be better. Why is it that as questions, they are like the ones that we should try to get to? Well, so we have how in the main question. How do teachers use higher order thinking skills? So if I want to answer that question of how something happens, then I should try to come up with other secondary questions that are going to help me answer that big how. For example, here one might think, okay, if I want to answer the how teachers use higher order thinking skills, but the first thing I have to do is what higher order thinking skills they use. So the first secondary question, what kind of higher order thinking skills do teachers work with 7th semester students? What I'm trying to do is first I want to know what higher order thinking skills they use, they work, they teach, and then in what ways do teachers teach or use or work high order thinking skills? I mean, first I want to know the higher order thinking skills teachers use, teach, implement, and then I want to know in what ways they use them, in what ways they bring them into the classroom, in what ways they present them to students, in what ways they have students use them, etc., etc. So these three research questions are a lot more connected, are better, seem to have a higher level of coherence, cohesiveness, etc. Now, in terms of the research objectives, you're going to notice that you have, well, because the question here is how, what you want to get in the general objective, the action that is more appropriate, describe or identify. If I ask you, for example, if in real life, if somebody asks you, how do you do something? How do you cook this? How do you get from here to there? What you're going to do, you're going to describe some steps. For example, if I ask you, how do you cook? So you're going to say, okay, first I use this, I wash them, I clean them up, I cut them, I chop them, etc. You're just thinking about describing, identifying something, a series of actions. So how, the question how, seems to be connected better to the action describe or identify. Well, because we have describe in the general objective, then you have to think about, okay, if I want to describe what actions, what verbs relate to that big action of describing. So notice that you can come up with identify, characterize, recognize. Those three actions, identify, characterize, recognize, are better connected to the big one, describe. Identify what? Well, in the secondary question, we were asking ourselves about what kind of higher order thinking skills teachers were using. We'll notice that in the specific objective, the first one, then we have identify the kind of higher order thinking skills. So you notice that here you have a connection that is within the questions, within the objectives, but also between questions and objectives. In what ways do teachers teach higher order thinking skills? Sorry about the high order, well, higher. And then we should have here in the specific objective connected to that question. If I want to say in what ways, well, characterize, recognize the teaching activities teachers use to teach higher order thinking skills. You could also say characterize the ways teachers use to teach higher order thinking skills. So the idea, what we want to do is to make sure that the questions and the objectives are specific, are concrete, and they are related within the main question and the two secondary questions, the research objective, the general objective, the specific objectives, and that if you have a look at them and you read them, they look, they read, they sound, that you have a better understanding of what you want to answer and what you want to get out of your research proposal. Evidently, here we can change some wording, we can improve some things that we might not find very appropriate, but the point that we're trying to make here is in terms of cohesiveness, coherence, they being connected, etc., etc. Okay, let's move on to the research problem justification. How do we justify our research problem? Well, normally we start with the theoretical and the policy or policy relevance. In other words, how does this study respond to calls made by entities, institutions, experts? How is this contributing? That's something important. Also, if my study is going to help move knowledge or is going to fill gaps in knowledge, like the second idea that we have with contributing with precisions or developments of existing knowledge. So what you're trying to say is this study, the one that I'm proposing with the research statement, with the research formulation, has relevance theoretically or based on policies. Policies in this case means, for example, if huge or big institutions such as, for example, in your country, the Ministry of Education, or within your own school or within your own university, they have created guidelines that you think your study is going to help. Then you can also think about practical implications, that your study is going to respond to the needs, interests of an educational institution, of students, of teachers, that is going to solve or alleviate a difficulty or a conflict in that particular institution, in that particular community. Also, you might think about the social relevance. So you're going to here try to say and explain what and who will benefit from the research. For example, what entities or actors will participate, will come together, will be promoted. You want also to state the social projection that the study has. What elements will it contribute to help make decisions, improve processes, etc. So you have theoretical or policy-related relevance, practical implications, social relevance, and finally, methodological pertinence. In other words, you want to indicate here that you're going to use relevant congruent approaches or types of studies according to guidelines proposed in theories or suggestions given by experts. The experts say this and that in terms of theory and methods, and I'm going to apply them, I'm going to follow them. Okay, we're going to stop here and continue in our next video.